This is the story of Maya, an 18-year-old Florida transgender desister.
Even if you're an adult who falls into it, especially if you were started as a kid and were raised on it and believed it for years, even if you don't have hormones until or access to any medical intervention as a kid, now that you're 18 and you're still in that mindset, you go wild with your hormones and your surgery, and
Mhm.
nobody can stop you now. So
For those of you that have never heard of the term desister, let's back up and talk for just a moment about a detransitioner. A detransitioner is, let's say, a girl who thinks that she's transgender, thinks that she's a boy, and she lives in a liberal state like California. There are 20 some others. As a child, she has access to puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones, testosterone. She can even have her breast amputated. Then, when she wakes up, let's say in her 20s, 30s, whenever, and she realizes, oh, I've always been a female, I'm a woman now. She is what's called a detransitioner because she's already damaged her body with drugs and surgery. In contrast, if that same girl lives in Florida or another red state, she cannot have the drugs or surgery. She is protected. And if she wakes up before she's 18, then she is known as a desister. However, if she does not desist by the time she is 18, let's say, for example, she has liberal parents who affirm her gender identity, then this girl can run out on her 18th birthday and start testosterone, have her breast amputated, and even get in line for bottom surgery. One of the first questions I asked Maya is, why did she start thinking she was a boy?
I felt like, okay, I started identifying as full trans like a boy because I thought I was more masculine than feminine a lot, even though I don't know about that, but whatever. But and the gender dysphoria kept increasing.
In addition to a girl feeling that she's more masculine, which is the old fashioned tomboy, like Maya did, other risk factors for a girl to begin to think she's a boy are a history of being abused, that's by within the family or outside the family, having a mental disorder such as autism or depression, or simply the fact that she's a girl. Girls are more vulnerable to social contagion, whether that's wearing too much makeup at an early age, an eating disorder. Girls are simply more vulnerable than boys. As I've shared elsewhere, when my daughter was young, she was a tomboy. So, had we lived in an ultra liberal red state like California, where there's all this transgender social contagion, she could have begun to question what sex, what gender she is, because she liked rough and tumble things. She was a tomboy. But anyway, let's get back to Maya. I started to ask her about some other risk factors to include if she had a mental illness.
I used to have depression at the time. I did,
While
but then
prior to feeling you were not your birth sex, or
yeah,
what?
prior and during.
Okay. Okay. Do you think you having depression may have made you more vulnerable to
Yeah, I
thinking?
think so.
Mhm.
Because one, it made me more like low self-esteem. So when people or anyone when I came out on that site and got like the affirm, the love bomb, whatever, that means a lot more to you. When you feel bad about yourself, if you're confident in yourself, you can go live without them. Who cares if they're what they think? Because I have other people or I have myself. I don't need them to call me, say they like me. But when you don't, that's like all you have.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that and the negative feelings about myself, my body, that was a little bit like dysphoria was could be seen as dysphoria and could get worse when you ruminate about it.
Maya told me about TrevorSpace, which is an online community for people with gender dysphoria. They have the age 13 to 24, but you don't have to show proof of your age. So you could have a very young girl talking to a transsexual male, they're always men, about her confusion because, let's say, she's a tomboy or she has depression, whatever the case is. Not surprisingly, TrevorSpace made Maya's gender dysphoria worse. And I'm sure it does a lot of other children as well.
Before joining the site, I had struggled with depression and a level of discomfort with my body. When I first joined, everyone was really nice to me, so I kept coming on and posting because I was craving the high of that interaction with business. When I heard how they described gender dysphoria, it sounded very familiar to me, so I initially believed myself to be non-binary and then believed myself to be trans. Constantly ruminating and validating that my body was indeed wrong made my discomfort with my body worsen. Before joining, I had a level of discomfort with my body for various reasons, and a discomfort with being a girl, just mainly due to gender roles and being gay. Um, sorry. Yeah, so after believing myself to be trans, I get very uncomfortable being called a girl, dressing in feminine things, with my feminine body parts. Um, I was kind of disgusted with my body. I thought I saw my body as deformed almost because I thought it should have been male. And it would get to a point where I would sometimes cry looking at my body. So I didn't want to interact with people who didn't affirm me the way the site did. So I didn't interact with anybody else, so they became my only friends, my only social circle, and I believe the only people I could trust, even over my own family, people in person. And so I became pretty addicted to the site. I kept coming on, trying to crave that validation, but also couldn't interact with anybody else. And although not intentionally, the people on the site used that to manipulate me into only behaving how they want. Because if they weren't going to interact with me, I had nobody else in my life at all. So I made sure not to upset them at any point. Yeah. I think that's all I'm gonna say.
Maya also shared how she came out on TrevorSpace and to her parents.
So it was pretty common on the site to like come out as trans, gay, whatever to your family. It was just the thing everyone did, and a lot of people had like, good experiences or bad, whatever, but it was like kind of trendy to do. So I actually emailed her and told her, yeah, I'm transgender, essentially. She was kind of confused. I mean, I thought she'd have, because she said she was against it before, but I thought she would react like initially angry at me, but then she wasn't. She was kind of like more confused, like questioning, but then it kind of got like kind of increased, like, okay, like this makes no sense. This is not true. And I'm like, I kind of got like nervous that she was gonna like, because kids on the site would actually report that they were being abused, or whatever, either due to being trans or not. So I was actually kind of scared that she would get angry at me. So I just kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm not transgender or whatever, but I still identify that way. I just didn't tell her anymore.
Maya and I both live in Florida, so next we talked about transgender ideology and transgender social contagion in Florida. Florida is one of the more anti-trans states, is what they call it.
Yeah,
And our
red
governor,
state.
DeSantis, does not, there's a law that you cannot take opposite sex hormones, you cannot have puberty blockers. So, an interesting point is if you had lived in a more liberal state, how do you think your course might have been different?
I think it would be very different if I lived in like a sanctuary state or whatever they call it. Because in some of those states, they can actually like take you away from your parents if you do not affirm, essentially. So at the time, I was kind of like thinking this was serious, and I saw her rejecting me as abuse. So I might have, if I lived in a state like that, called Child Protective Services, been like, "Yo, my mom is not affirming," and I don't know where I would have ended up, or you know.
What, because you had mentioned that you were afraid that she would be very, perhaps even hostile, as some other kids on the site reported that their parents were, but not necessarily linked because they said that they're transgender, because the
Yeah.
parent was like that before. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Some of them like claimed that they came out and then their parent reacted badly to them when they hadn't before, but some
Okay.
of them were abused before. I don't know the full story of every kid on the site.
Okay. So there's kind of a mix there then. Okay. But how did your mom respond to you, say, over the course of the period of time that you did not think you were a female?
So I came out to her that one time, like honestly, like within a week. I was getting afraid because she wasn't being affirming. She wasn't being like mean to me, but she wasn't being affirming. So I like was scared. So I like essentially, I'll say, went back in the closet. I
Oh,
just like, okay, I took it back. I'm not. I agree with you. I'm not trans, whatever. But I was lying. So,
oh.
but for the rest of that time, I kind of like was stealth about it. Like I identified this way, and I tried to actively keep it hidden.
Mhm. Maya also talked about what happens to children in protected states like the state of Florida who have this gender dysphoria and they're affirmed by their family and others when these children turn 18.
When
You
you're believing it, it's hard to even think for yourself, even if you're an adult who falls into it, especially if you were started as a kid and were raised on it and believed it for years, even if you don't have hormones until or access to any medical intervention as a kid, now that you're 18 and you're still in that mindset, you go wild with your hormones and your surgery, and nobody can stop you now. So
million dollar question. When and how and why did Maya realize transgender is a bunch of nonsense? And when did you say that this epiphany occurred, that you realized it was a bunch of hogwash and you were definitely a female? How long ago was that?
that was probably when I was 16. I say like for that I really started saying I'm not trans anymore by the start of 11th grade. So I was probably like 16 and a half. So let's say, all in all, I started identifying as trans for, I guess, 3 to 4 years.
Mhm.
So from when I was like 13, 12, I don't know exactly when it started, to when I was 16.
And you're a senior now in high school, right?
Yes.
And you're fine with
Mhm.
sharing that. Um, what other information about yourself are you comfortable sharing in this public format in terms of like
I
what
mean,
area of Florida, or is there any,
uh,
rather than me asking you, is there anything that you feel comfortable sharing about,
I'll
like
say
maybe
South
high
Florida, and I'll
school,
say
South,
it's,
South
I'm in
Florida?
a blue city in a red state. So, like, my city is going to be go as far along with it as they can legally, but legally they're not going to get very far because this is a red state. They're not going to allow it, but they'll go as far as they can.
Next, May and I talked about President Trump's gender executive orders in terms of how effective they might be to protect children from transgender social contagion and eradicate transgender social contagion in the public schools. That is, if the executive orders are integrated into the classrooms at the direction of the respective school board superintendent.
So eradicating it in schools, mentioning of it, I think that would be helpful, but not super helpful because there's other ways you can find out if you're a teenager. Go online, look it up. If you have parents who believe this, they can just tell you. Or the books too. You can go. Well, you don't have to go to a school library. Go to a public library. Go to a bookstore. You'll find it. So defining man and woman as just your biological sex, it's not as helpful for kids identifying that way or are going to because this is from how it's seen on these sites and these circles, it's just seen as like this fascist tyrannical government is just denying existence. That's how it's seen. So they don't see this and think, oh, okay, that's just what it is. They see this as like active hate against them. So it's helpful, like for legal reasons, but not super helpful for those kids. Well, he did do that. I don't know if this was enacted or not, but the banning of trans surgeries for minors is going to be very, very helpful because whether your parents believe it or not, whether you live in a sanctuary state, whatever, this is just straight up safeguarding children from bodily harm. So you can believe it all you want, but you're not going to be harmed because of it. And I think that's extremely helpful, especially with these kids who have these Munchausen parents or affirming parents, or even like the parents who go to the therapist and they say, oh, your kid's going to kill themselves if you don't. So they believe it just to save their kid. This is just a safeguard them, and that's important. I think they should also be banning testosterone and estrogen treatments for these kids and puberty blockers too, because it's not just surgeries that are harmful.
And you just reminded me of something else you had mentioned when we were chatting prior to the show, that all this talk about this will save you. And if you don't, if you're not socially affirmed, then you're at risk to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Share a little bit about that, about what you heard.
So a lot of these kids fall into saying they have gender dysphoria because they're uncomfortable with their body, or they have other mental health issues, right? Or they don't fit in. They have something issue. They feel something is wrong with them. And so this is the solution. So when you are denying them that solution, they think that they actually are in danger of killing themselves, or that their life is never good. They're never going to get over this pain if they don't go down this path. I'll say for gender dysphoria, yes, that you hate your body, as a lot of teenagers do. They're saying not that you'll get over it or to like yourself, but that you will never be comfortable in your body if you do not transition. And so when you say, yeah, you cannot transition, or I do not support that, I do not believe in this, that is seen as abusive, that is seen as hate, or denying them healthcare because they really think that they will kill themselves or never be okay with themselves if they do not go down this path.
With getting back to Trump's executive orders in the school, have you noticed this year, since they became effective a little over a month ago, are teachers still calling a student by an opposite sex name? Have you
So
noticed?
actually in Florida, if you cannot, the school has to have parent permission now to call you a different name. This was recent before Trump, but recent, just a Florida thing. So the kids who were being called a different name by their teachers, they weren't the kids who were hiding it. They were the kids whose parents were affirming. And since they legally have the permission to call some kid that name, I think they still are.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Um, Let me touch on that just a little bit more. The difference between the children that have very liberal pro-transgender parents versus those that are neutral or are believe it's a bunch of nonsense. Talk a little bit more about the children that have the very liberal parents who obviously blatantly support transgender ideology.
Yeah, so they are definitely to me in more danger because they have another thing enforcing it. Because any person enforcing it who agrees with it, right? Because at the time when I got out of it, didn't have any friends really, and this was just when it was enacted that none of the teachers could call you anything. So I had nobody in my life that was affirming it, and it took that a while of that for me to think myself out of it. If you have a parent that's affirming it and reinforcing it, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to question it, A. And B, those are the kids that are going to get medication and surgery as a child or as a young adult. And that is irreversible.
I
Even when, sorry, and especially now that your body's changed, it's even harder to question it now
Mhm.
because now you can't go back. So it's like, even if you do, okay, maybe I am a girl, but it's too late now. That's
Right.
something that could happen.
Yeah, she's lost her breast or, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm grown to be, I'm whatever. Or even further, people have like a bottom surgery.
Mhm.
People never have like their sexual function anymore. They don't have, they will never, they may never look like a girl again. So even if they say I'm a girl, what's the point? So it's harder for them to get back out of bed unless they're extremely distressed and really just know that this is all crap. They're not going to question it then. So these are the kids whose parents are affirming are actually really in danger to me.
Yeah, I was posed that question one time, and, thinking about how these children that have these very liberal parents, how do they tell them, no, mom?
Yeah,
I mean, it's got to be just almost, frightening because they can't
yeah,
tell their friends and they can't, it would be so perhaps difficult to confide in their liberal parents that
yeah.
do
And
you
their liberal parents, they even try to convince them that like, oh, you're just believing a lie. They might try to convince them further, like, okay, don't let the trans critical people get in your head. You are transgender. You've known this for a long time.
to close, I asked May if there was anything else that she would like to share.
I mean, I'm trying to think of what I want to say here. Well, first of all, I want to reach out to people who are my or was my age at the time in a similar situation, or parents of kids who were my age at the time. I want to be real. Like, this is how it is. This is what can happen. This is what did happen. And I am not the worst case scenario in any way, shape, or form. It could get a lot worse. And I want to just make sure everybody knows that. Because the more real I am about this, the easier it is to see the truth, essentially.